$1,000 blazer, reeking of that sharp perfume that probably costs more than my truck, comes storming into my grandfather's old cabin, shouting about violations in jurisdiction like she owns the place. She has no idea who she's dealing with. Even worse for her, she doesn't realize she's live streaming her own downfall to over 3,000 people 6 months earlier. I thought Karen was just another overbearing neighbor on a power trip, but she wasn't just that. She was knee-deep in a $4 million embezzlement racket, and I was about to accidentally topple her entire empire. So, what would you do if some HOA tyrant barged onto your property during the most important moment of your life? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. My bet half of you have dealt with someone like this before. Let me rewind and tell you how this nightmare started. 6 months back, life was good. My name's Marcus Henley, 52, and after 3 decades of crawling through mud trenches, wiring up power grids across 3 counties, I'd finally earned my peace. The prize? My grandfather's fishing cabin on Clearwater Lake, 2 acres of heaven he bought in 1963. For just $800? Hard to believe, right? Land that cheap, now worth more than most houses. This wasn't some fancy new build either. The place was hand-hewn logs, a fireplace pop, built stone by stone with his calloused hands, and a screened porch that creaked just the right way. I kept it off-grid by choice. Solar panels humming on the roof, a clean well that tasted like childhood summers, and a septic system that worked better than most city setups. Every morning, the mist curling over the lake reminded me why Pop picked this spot. He always said the land chooses you, not the other way around. He also used to warn me, Marcus, if someone wants your land real bad, find out why, because it's usually worth more than they're telling you. Then came Delilah Cromwell, though everyone just called her that HOA psycho. She rolled into our quiet lakeside like a hurricane in designer shoes. She was 58, fresh from some California subdivision where lording over neighbors was her full-time job. She drove a pearl-white Escalade with plates that literally said Rule 1. And she wore her HOA badge like a sheriff's star. Her mission? To turn our rustic getaway into what she called an upscale resort community. At the time, I didn't. No, she had already pushed 3 elderly couples to sell their cabins in just 2 months. That should have been a red flag. Her first strike came on a Tuesday morning. I was sipping coffee on Pop's porch, watching loons teach their chicks to dive. I heard the click of high heels on my dock. At 7 a.m. on my private property, minutes later, she taped a notice to my screen door. Violation citation. Unsightly dock structure, damaging community property values. Fine, $500. Compliance required within 72 hours. Daily penalties to follow. I read it twice in disbelief. That dock, the same one Pop and I reinforced when I was 12, was suddenly an eyesore. It's threatening real estate values. Still trying to be reasonable. I walked over to explain that my property predated the HOA by 40 years. Her reply, standing in my driveway with hands on her hips, "Everyone on this lake answers to me, sweetie. Ask the Hendersons how fighting me worked out for them." The Hendersons, my neighbors of 23 years, had suddenly downsized. Just last month, something cold sank in my stomach. Then she pulled out her phone and started snapping pictures of my panels. My garden, even Pop's hand-carved porch rails like an appraiser. The nauseating chemical stench from her idling SUV hung in the air. By week's end, 3 more citations arrived. More fines. More threats. It was clear Delilah Cromwell had declared war on my family's land. At first, I thought it was just power-hungry neighbor nonsense. Annoying, but manageable. What I didn't realize was that I had just stepped into something far darker than petty. HOA politics. Pop's warning echoed. Find out why they want your land. I was about to learn why, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 days after. I ignored her so-called deadline because there was no way I was tearing down Pop's DACA certified letter showed up. Cease and desist. Violation of community. Waterway regulations. The letterhead read Blackstone, Meyer and Associates, one of those firms that charge more per hour than I used to make in a week. According to them, My dock illegally extended into community waters, and I owed $3,000 in back fees or they'd slap a lien on my land. For a second, panic set in. They had lawyers, had a wrench set, and a short temper. But then I remembered Pop's fishing day advice. The truth is always in the county records. Never trust their words, look at the papers yourself. So I drove down to the courthouse basement, that dusty archive where history hides. Betty, the clerk who remembered Pop from his tournament days, helped me dig through the surveys. What I found nearly knocked me flat. The original deed, stamped 1963, showed my property stretched 50 feet into the lake. That dock wasn't trespassing. It was dead center on my own water. And here's the kicker. The HOA wasn't even formed. Until 1998, decades later, Pop's property rights trumped their entire existence. Armed with copies, I left the courthouse grinning. That pride lasted until I tried to head into town for groceries only, to find Delilah's Escalade parked sideways, blocking my driveway. Like a police barricade. When I knocked, she rolled the window down just enough to hiss. "Oh, Marcus, just reviewing the community parking rules. Might take a while." Her engine idled, perfume choking the air. I couldn't believe it, 52 years old, having built half the county's power grid. And here I was held hostage in my own driveway by a self-crowned HOA queen, and she wasn't slowing down. Within a week, she formed the so-called Lakeside Beautification Committee. Sounded nice except it was basically her hit squad. Suddenly neighbors who used to wave were avoiding me. Her Facebook posts were masterworks of passive-aggressive warfare. Some people just don't care about our community values. Hashtag Lakeside Strong, hashtag Property Value Protection. The comment sections became a mob, folks I'd known for decades suddenly, parroting her words like she was running a cult. And that was just the beginning, it turned out. Not everyone backing Karen was doing it willingly. A few neighbors quietly apologized to me in private. Tom and Susan Martinez pulled me aside during an evening walk and admitted Karen had suggested they file complaints about my property or risk a flood of their own citations. Already gone after old Mr. Peterson for non-regulation? Flower boxes and threatened the young couple down the street over their baby's swing set. She's got dirt on everyone.
Ow.
Tom whispered, glancing over his shoulder like Karen might be crouched in the bushes with a camera. Then he added, her husband's up at the state capitol. Political ties, you know. That hit me like a bucket of ice water. This wasn't neighborhood squabbling anymore. This woman had connections that stretched beyond the lake. That very night, I walked out to find my mailbox splattered with neon orange spray paint. Comply or leave. My hidden solar-powered trail cam caught everything in his pearl white. Escalade, pulling away at 2:30 a.m., plates clear as day. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office. And guess who arrived? Deputy Chad Cromwell, Karen's nephew. He looked at the footage, shrugged, and muttered, probably just kids, you know how they are. As I scraped the thick paint off with raw fingers, it felt like sandpaper on my soul. Pop's voice echoed in my head. Sometimes you need bigger guns for a bigger fight. Time to find some. Karen's next attack came dressed up as civic duty. She must have realized direct pressure wasn't breaking me. So she went bureaucratic. The first knock was Dale Morrison, county building inspector and an old coworker from back in my line days. The apologetic look on his face told me everything. Marcus, I'm sorry, but I got a complaint about unpermitted structures. I've got to check. 3 hours later, Dale had inspected every inch of my cabin with clipboard and tape measure. His verdict, not only was everything legal, it exceeded modern standards. Pop might have been old school, but the man built things to last. Dale muttered as he packed up. Whoever filed this either doesn't know squat or they're just wasting time. The next day brought Environmental Officer Janet Bennett, responding to reports that my septic was leaking into the lake. She left impressed, said it worked better than most new systems. Then came Fire Marshal Bob Rodriguez, checking my solar panels for hazardous wiring. Clean bill of health again. Each bogus inspection stole a day of my peace and carved at my sanity. Worse, it built a paper trail painting me as some kind of problem homeowner. My union rep used to warn us about this trick. Bureaucratic harassment looks official on paper, even when it's pure malice. While I wrestled with the inspection, Circus Karen was busy spinning her media web. Channel 7's Community Spotlight aired an interview where she painted herself as a crusader protecting families from dangerous neighbors. With carefully angled photos, she made my cabin look like a collapsing shack, claimed children were at risk, and stood right on my dock declaring she was fighting for community safety. My phone buzzed nonstop with angry texts from neighbors who'd watched the segment. Half the community now thought I was some kind of environmental hazard, but here's where she slipped. She got greedy. Jake Martinez, an old buddy from the electricians union, called me after seeing the broadcast. "Marcus, that woman's full of it. Everyone knows it. You built half the county's clean energy grid. Your solar setup's what I use to train apprentices." Within 48 hours, Jake had rallied a parade of my former coworkers. 20 master electricians rolled up, inspected my system, and publicly vouched for its safety. That hazardous installation narrative evaporated overnight. That's when high school friend attorney Chuck Davis stopped by for a beer. He dropped a bombshell. "You know, Marcus, the Attorney General's office has been investigating HOA corruption, harassment, forced sales, shady buyers. It's a pattern. And what you're describing fits it perfectly." "What kind of pattern?" I asked, though I already knew. Elderly homeowners getting buried in citations. Property values pushed down, then developers swoop in with cash. "The AG's office needs witnesses with evidence. Someone like you." As his words sank in, the hum of my refrigerator seemed deafening. Karen wasn't just some nosy neighbor. She was part of something far bigger, and I had the proof they needed. That night, they started documenting everything, every citation, every inspection, every post she made. I dug into Karen's background too. Turns out her husband, Robert Cromwell, wasn't just connected. He was state Democratic Party treasurer, meaning he had access to zoning changes, land deals, and political favors. The morning air that usually calmed me now just reminded me of everything I stood to lose. This was no longer about HOA fines. It was about whether I'd become the next victim in their money-making scheme. Karen's next strike proved just how far she'd go. She launched a full-on character assassination campaign. Her Facebook post hit like a punch to the gut. Urgent safety concerns regarding aggressive lakefront resident. Parents keep children away from the eastern shore. Filing for protective measures. Hashtag lakeside safety. Hashtag protect our kids aggressive. That's me. The guy who ran the kids fishing derby for 15 years. Within hours, it had 40+ shares and a mob of comments. Some neighbors swore they'd always thought something was off about me. Others praised Karen for her bravery. Half those comments came from fake-looking profiles with stock photos. She wasn't just spreading lies. She had an entire smear campaign machine. 2 days later, she filed for a restraining order. The petition claimed I'd threatened community leaders. Complete fiction. Judge Patricia Riz, who'd known my family for years, tossed it for lack of evidence. But it didn't matter. Now there was a public record tying my name to threats. Sitting on Pop's porch with a beer, I felt the weight pressing down. That old recliner of his, once pure comfort, felt heavy. For the first time, I wondered if this fight was going to cost me everything I'd worked 3 decades to earn. Judge Riss may have tossed out Karen's restraining order for lack of evidence, but the damage was already done. There was now a court record with my name and the word threats tied to it. That label followed me like a shadow, heavier than I wanted to admit. Most nights I'd sit on Pop's porch, a beer in hand, wondering if this fight was worth it. I'd worked 30 years to earn this peaceful retirement, yet all I had now was stress. Even Pop's old recliner, once the most comforting spot in the world, felt less like rest and more like a reminder that I was carrying the weight of a legacy someone was trying to erase. Just as I was ready to give up, something unexpected happened. The community began pushing back. Retired Judge William Bill Carter, who used to fish with Pop in the 70s, showed up at my door with a thermos of coffee and a few words of advice. "Marcus, she's playing a game your grandfather would have seen through in a heartbeat. She's banking on you feeling alone. Don't let her win that way. He reminded me that this level of harassment almost always pointed to bigger criminal activity. Nobody goes this far over a dock unless serious money is involved. Then support started rolling in. The local VFW, where I'd been a member for 2 decades, released a statement calling Karen's accusations baseless attacks against a decorated community member. The Historical Society highlighted my cabin as one of the last authentic lakefront homes worth preserving. Even the environmental watchdog group praised my solar and septic, set up as a model for sustainable living. For the first time in months, I felt the tide shifting. But Karen wasn't finished, not even close. Her next move was pure sabotage. She somehow convinced the utility company to investigate irregularities in my power supply. For 3 days, my electricity was cut while they tore through my solar grid system looking for problems that didn't exist. Then came a string of bogus police reports, suspicious activity at the cabin in broad daylight, loud noises, possible domestic disturbance, unusual traffic suggesting drug activity. The so-called visitors were just my union buddies stopping by to check on me. Still, every report sent sheriff's deputies to my door, each visit adding another incident record to my file. And who usually responded? Deputy Chad Cromwell. He'd show up, go through the motions, and leave with a smirk that made it obvious. He knew exactly what his aunt was pulling. One evening, he even had the nerve to tell me, "You know, Mr. Henley, if you just apologized to my aunt and brought your property into compliance, all this would probably go away." That's when it hit me this wasn't about me anymore. Karen was using me as an example. She wanted every homeowner to see what happened if you didn't fall in line. The Hendersons, who'd sold suddenly after 23 years, must have endured the same torment. Now, even the ping of my phone made my stomach tighten. Each notification could mean another neighbor turning against me, another fake report, another twist in her psychological warfare. But it also brought unexpected messages of support from old friends, from people who still believed in me. The real breakthrough came while I was buried in paperwork for my meeting with the Attorney General's office. Chuck had arranged it, saying they needed detailed records for their HOA corruption probe. I was at Pop's oak table, surrounded by stacks of citations, inspection reports, and legal threats, when I noticed something small, almost too small to see. At the bottom of one violation notice was a line that read, "Fines payable to Lakeside Estates Community Improvement Fund." A CCT number 847,291. It sounded official enough, but something about it bothered me. After 30 years of reading electrical contracts, my gut told me to dig deeper. Betty, the county clerk, had basically become my partner in this fight. She pulled the HOA's public filings for me and laid them out like a deck of cards. "Here's the deal, Marcus," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Associations have to file annual reports, same as any nonprofit. Look at these numbers. The books were a mess. Over 2 years, the HOA had collected $280,000 in emergency dock repairs. No repairs had ever been made. Another $150,000 supposedly went to landscaping services from Cromwell Grounds and Maintenance, company owned by Karen's brother in land, incorporated just 3 weeks after she took power. The kicker: insurance claims. The HOA filed for storm damage reimbursement 3 different times in 18 months, totaling $95,000. But cross-checking with national weather, service records showed those days had been crystal clear. Betty lowered her voice, even though no one else was around. "Marcus, this looks like fraud. Straight-up fraud." My hands trembled as I photocopied the evidence. The slick feel of those documents was like holding a loaded weapon. This wasn't just about harassing me. Karen was running an organized theft ring, bleeding the entire lake community dry. And then came the final piece. The HOA was paying $5,000 a month to Clearwater Property Solutions for administrative services. I looked it up. The address was just a P.O. box in the same district where Karen lived. Everything snapped into focus. Karen's campaign wasn't about property aesthetics or community values. She was deliberately driving down property values, forcing sales at rock-bottom prices, and funneling community funds into her family's pockets. Those mysterious cash buyers, it's probably tied to the same developer she was in bed with. I thought about the Hendersons. It's probably scraping by in some tiny apartment, not realizing they'd been robbed twice. Once when they sold for pennies, and again, through the crooked fees they'd paid, Pop had been right again. Follow the money. And I had just uncovered the trail. That night, I turned Pop's spare room into a war room. Maps of the lake covered the walls, showing original land boundaries versus the HOA's inflated claims. Charts connected Karen's timeline of harassment to the missing funds. Photos, videos, and reports were pinned like evidence in a detective show. Except I wasn't chasing a serial killer. I was chasing a suburban embezzler. The next morning, the Attorney General's office sent 2 prosecutors to my cabin. Sarah Mitchell, sharp-eyed and relentless, and David Bennett, calm but calculating. From the way they walked in, I could tell they meant business. And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, justice was finally within reach. David was younger, maybe in his early 30s, but he carried a quiet intensity. That told me he'd already put plenty of white-collar criminals behind bars. "Mr. Henley," Sarah said, spreading stacks of financial documents across Pop's dining table. "Wow, what you've uncovered here goes way beyond HOA harassment. This is systematic fraud that could affect dozens of families." David pulled out a tablet and began connecting dots I hadn't even considered. "We've been investigating nearly identical schemes in 4 other counties. The pattern never changes. Politically connected individuals exploit HOA positions to manipulate property values while siphoning community funds." That's when they revealed the FBI was already involved. Agent Rebecca Torres from the White Collar Crime Unit had been tracking fraudulent development operations across the region. "My records," they explained, were the missing link tying multiple investigations together. "It's the beauty of financial crime," Agent Torres told me during a video call, "is that it always leaves a trail. Your HOA records show textbook money laundering, fake invoices, shell companies, even insurance scams. But documents aren't enough. We need witnesses, recordings, and evidence of crimes in progress." Meanwhile, Chuck, my lawyer friend, had been working quietly in the background. He connected me with 17 other lakefront families who'd endured the same harassment. When we gathered at the VFW hall, their stories made my blood boil. Thompsons had paid $8,000 in bogus violation fines before being forced to sell their cabin for 30% below value. The Garcias had been hit with $12,000 in emergency assessments for lake projects that never happened. Old Mrs. Patterson had been so intimidated by Karen's legal threats that she abandoned her home of 43 years and moved in with her daughter in Florida. The playbook was always the same: escalate harassment, invent violations, pressure homeowners into selling, and funnel the money into a fraudulent community improvement fund that was nothing more than Karen's personal bank account. Retired accountant Frank Weber, who volunteered to review the records, broke it down for us. HOAs must file IRS Form 1120 tax returns every year once they pass certain income thresholds. Honest associations file them religiously. Crooked ones usually don't because real accounting would expose the theft. Frank had discovered our HOA hadn't filed proper tax returns in over 2 years, despite pulling in hundreds of thousands of dollars. That single fact alone could trigger federal tax evasion charges. The strategy sessions felt like military operations. We had financial records, witness statements, harassment recordings, and fraud documentation. But Agent Torres wanted more. "The strongest cases are built when suspects are caught in real time," she explained. "We need Karen on camera, incriminating herself." That's when Chuck proposed the perfect trap. The Attorney General wants to announce new HOA reform legislation. What if she makes the announcement at Marcus's cabin, symbolic defending homeowners' rights on the very ground where they were violated? Sarah immediately saw it. And if Karen's pattern holds, she'll try to interfere. Obsession with control will make her expose herself. We spent the next week preparing what Agent Torres called a controlled confrontation scenario. My cabin was outfitted with hidden recording equipment. Undercover officers positioned themselves around the lake. Multiple agencies coordinated for rapid response. Local media was tipped off. Social media campaigns were primed to counter Karen's inevitable lies. It reminded me of my old union days plan for every contingency. Have backups for the backups. The trap was set. Karen's behavior was so predictable, we could practically script her next move. All we needed was for her to take the bait, and she did. As pressure mounted, Karen's tactics spiraled from calculated harassment into outright sabotage. It was like watching a cornered animal, reckless, furious, dangerous. The first sign came when my solar panels mysteriously failed one Tuesday morning. Batteries were dead, the inverter flashing error codes. My electrician buddy Jake investigated and found the wiring had been tampered with, loosened just enough to cripple the system without obvious damage. "Marcus, this is professional sabotage," Jake said, snapping photos. "Whoever did this knows electrical systems. They wanted trouble without leaving fingerprints." But Jake had been smarter than Karen realized. He'd installed a hidden security camera by the electrical panel after the first incident. 2 nights later, we caught her red-handed sneaking across my property at 3 a.m. with a screwdriver and wire cutters. The footage was crystal clear. Karen Cromwell, president of the HOA and supposed pillar of the community, vandalizing my property under the cover of darkness. Not long after, my boat dock was targeted. I came back from town to find my boat drifting in the middle of the lake. The heavy chains securing it had been cut clean through with bolt cutters. Pop's old 1978 bass boat, the one he'd cherished, was scraped and damaged after hitting rocks on the far shore. Felt like desecrating his memory. But the most vicious attack came against my septic system. I'd just passed a flawless inspection, but suddenly the system failed. The stench was unbearable sewage mixed with harsh chemicals that burned your eyes from 50 feet away. The emergency septic crew discovered someone had poured industrial-grade drain cleaner into the system, killing all the beneficial bacteria and leaving behind a toxic mess. "This isn't random," the technician said, holding up a chemical test. "Results: someone with knowledge deliberately sabotaged it. This stuff costs money and isn't easy to get." The $3,200 repair bill stung. But the real value was in the forensic evidence tying it to deliberate sabotage. While I fought through sewage disasters, Kieran launched a media war. Anonymous accounts, clearly bots, flooded social media with copy-paste posts accusing me of property violations and unsafe conditions. At the same time, her intimidation network went into overdrive. Deputy Chad Cromwell cruised past my cabin 4 or 5 times a day, slowing down, sometimes parking in my driveway to run plates on my visitors. The county inspector suddenly found code violations and projects that had already passed. The fire marshal got anonymous tips about non-existent hazards. Environmental services received reports of illegal dumping. I'd already been cleared of it. It was bureaucratic warfare, 1,000 small cuts designed to wear me down. Now she was targeting my supporters. Jake's electrical license was suddenly under review. Bill Carter, the retired judge advising me, got hit with a bogus bar complaint. The VFW post faced surprise fire inspections threatening to shut down bingo night. Even the Historical Society was hit with zoning complaints. The constant anxiety had become something I learned to function with, almost like the bitter edge of coffee that came with every morning. But Karen's frantic attempts to outmaneuver us were backfiring. Each new act of sabotage was now more fuel for the case, carefully logged by investigators. Her circle of allies was shrinking fast as her behavior became more erratic and unstable. The Attorney General's office was quietly building a flawless prosecution file, while Karen, blind to her own downfall, kept digging deeper with each reckless stunt. Agent Torres described it as classic criminal escalation. When cornered, offenders often resort to desperate moves, piling up evidence against themselves in the process. It was Karen, burying herself one broken solar panel at a time. Her final scheme, however, nearly succeeded in its audacity. Using her husband's political ties, Karen discovered that my scheduled meeting wasn't with just any bureaucrat. It was with Attorney General Patricia Williamson herself. Instead of pulling back, Karen tried to weaponize the revelation. She crafted a plan to recast herself as a victim of political persecution, claiming that the state's highest prosecutor was abusing power to target her family for partisan reasons. By storming my cabin and filming it as proof of corruption, she aimed to portray herself as a heroic whistleblower, defying government abuse. The first sign of this strategy showed up online. Karen contacted Government Accountability Watch, a blogger group known for amplifying tales of overreach. Her narrative was slick. Local HOA. President persecuted by big government because her husband belongs to the rival political party. Headlines began spreading just 3 days before my meeting. Family under attack. State officials harass citizens to silence opposition. Suddenly, strangers across the internet who had no idea our small lake community even existed were furious at what they believed was a partisan hit job. But Karen's masterpiece was the live stream ambush. She had arranged to broadcast her confrontation with Williamson, branding it citizen journalism, exposing corruption in real time. Her goal was to barge into the cabin mid-meeting, capture everything on video, and let her supporters spin it as undeniable evidence of misconduct. What she didn't know was that Torres already had warrants covering Karen's phone and social media. We were fully aware of her blogger outreach, her streaming setup, and even the scripted talking points she planned to spontaneously shout. "It's actually perfect," Torres said during our last prep session. "She's going to hand us a real-time confession while committing felonies on camera. We couldn't stage it better." The irony was, sweet Karen thought she was setting a trap. She was stepping into the most documented arrest in HOA history. Her support system was collapsing too, though she ignored the signs. Board members had already distanced themselves as financial discrepancies piled up. Her husband was under his own ethics probe and couldn't shield her anymore. Even Deputy Chad had been reassigned once internal affairs began probing his oversights in the vandalism cases. But Karen wasn't thinking rationally. The weight of covering up fraud, facing multiple investigations, and keeping her facade intact had driven her over the edge. She grew paranoid, imagining neighbors spying on her, lashing out with threatening calls, and accusing everyone of being part of a conspiracy. The night before the Attorney General's arrival, she phoned 4 families, warning them of consequences. If they cooperated with authorities, all 4 calls were recorded, strengthening the charges of witness intimidation and conspiracy. That evening, sat on Pop's porch as the sunset painted the lake with crimson and gold. Loons called across. The water, a reminder of what I was fighting for. Tomorrow would decide whether I could enjoy this peace in retirement, or spend my later years watching Karen's endless appeals drag on from prison. The cabin felt transformed. Hidden cameras and recording devices turned it from a home into the centerpiece of something much bigger than my property dispute. This wasn't just about MIT, it was about proving that small-time bullies with political pull couldn't terrorize entire communities without accountability. I opened Pop's weathered Bible and read the verse he'd underlined about David standing against Goliath. Beside it, in his handwriting, sometimes the little guy wins because he's fighting for something greater than himself. The next morning would be Karen's last gamble. She'd crash through that door convinced she was about to destroy. Her enemies unaware, she was walking straight into her own ruin. The pieces were set, cameras ready, law enforcement waiting. All we needed was Karen's finale, anticipation mixed with my morning coffee like never before. Attorney General Williamson surprised me. She wasn't the towering, distant figure I had pictured. Instead, she was a grounded woman in her 50s sharp-eyed, firm yet approachable, like a no-nonsense principal. She arrived promptly at 9 with a thermos of coffee and a briefcase stacked with evidence. "Mr. Henley," she began, settling into Pop's recliner as if it were her own. "Your documentation has uncovered HOA corruption across 6 counties. This isn't just local fraud. It's part of a larger pattern of organized theft." We were knee-deep in discussion when the sound arrived. Karen's Escalade roared into the driveway, gravel spraying in all directions. Doors slammed. Voices barked about camera angles and audio levels. She hadn't come alone. Production team was here for her so-called moment of vindication. Showtime. Torres whispered over her earpiece from behind the woodshed. Williamson didn't so much as glance up. She kept making notes, calm as Karen's shrill voice grew louder outside, rehearsing her indignation for the live audience. "This is it, folks," Karen shouted. "We're about to expose the corruption targeting my family. the Attorney General. Herself is colluding with my harasser. The pounding of her heels across the porch was a countdown to her own downfall. Crash. The door burst open, splintering under her kick. Shards of wood scattered across the floor. Williamson's coffee mug toppled and shattered, punctuating the moment. Karen stormed in, phone aloft, streaming live to her followers, oblivious that she had just committed trespassing, breaking and entering an assault directly in front. Of the state's top prosecutor, I demand to know why the Attorney General is conspiring in secret with this man. She screamed, "This is harassment, political persecution. I have rights." Her phone kept rolling until Williamson calmly rose and displayed her badge. The look on Karen's face froze. Terror, dawning in real time. "Mrs. Cromwell," Williamson said evenly, her voice the kind that could make even seasoned criminals wilt. "I am Attorney General Patricia Williamson. You have just committed multiple felonies in my presence, and your entire stunt is being recorded by both my office and your own broadcast." Karen's live stream was still rolling when everything collapsed. Her once loyal followers, who had treated her like a hero, watched in real time as their champion unraveled into a rambling, incoherent wreck. The comment section erupted with shock and anger as people realized they'd been cheering for a fraud who had just exposed herself on camera. "This is my community. I'm in charge here." Karen stammered, waving her HOA badge like it meant something. But her delusions shattered the moment FBI agent Torres stepped through my open doorway, flanked by 2 more federal agents. "Mrs. Cromwell, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, witness intimidation, and criminal harassment. And thanks to your live stream, you just confessed to about 3,000 witnesses," Torres said. The snap of handcuffs echoed through my cabin like the closing chapter of a long, miserable book. Karen's phone clattered to the floor, still recording. As her online audience dwindled into horrified onlookers, I rose from Pop's couch with a satisfied smile. "Karen, meet the state's Attorney General. She's very interested in your bookkeeping." Neighbors gathered on my porch, silent and stunned, as the woman who had tormented us for months was read her rights in my living room. Mrs. Patterson, who'd returned from her daughter's house just to witness the moment, stood crying tears of joy. Sheriff Rodriguez arrived in time to escort Karen on her walk of shame handcuffed. Stumbling past the dock, she tried to destroy the solar panels she called dangerous, and the cabin she labeled an eyesore, her pearl-white Escalade, with its smug vanity plates, was hauled off as evidence. The live stream ended with Karen's desperate cry, "This isn't over. My husband will fix this. You don't know who you're dealing with." But we did know. We were dealing with a criminal. And criminals end up in prison. 3 months later, it felt like Christmas morning as Judge Michael Harrison handed down her sentence. 3 years in federal prison, $340,000 in restitution, and a lifetime ban from any HOA board in the United States. Her husband Robert soon followed, resigning in disgrace after his shady ties as a party treasurer were exposed. He received 18 months for conspiracy and abuse of office. The HOA itself dissolved overnight, placed by the Clearwater Lake Volunteer Association. No fees, no citations, no dictators, just neighbors working together. My role in uncovering the scheme earned me something unexpected: whistleblower compensation. The $45,000 check was more than money, it was justice. Better still, the Attorney General used our case to launch new state laws, now known as the Henley Act, requiring HOAs to undergo annual independent audits and criminalizing harassment for-profit schemes. Our evidence also triggered prosecutions in 5 states, exposing a massive web of HOA corruption. Families who'd fled came back. The Hendersons bought a new cabin to Lotsdown. Mrs. Patterson returned and threw a sunrise block party. Values soared, and our lake thrived. My once mocked solar cabin now hosts eco-tours and was featured in the state's Renewable Energy Showcase. I even started the Pops Legacy Scholarship with part of my reward, offering $500 grants to kids entering trade schools, exactly the kind of future Pop believed in. The Clearwater Lake Festival became a regional hit, raising enough funds for 3 tiny homes for homeless veterans. Laughter, barbecue, and music replaced Karen's reign of fear. But the best reward? Peace. Now, I sit on Pop's porch, watching the sunset paint gold across the lake, hearing the loons call over the hills where he once taught me to fish. No more certified letters. No more morning inspections. Just the rhythm of the water and the knowledge that sometimes David really does beat. Goliath. Netflix even filmed a documentary, Here HOA Hell, how one man took down a criminal empire set. To air next spring. The proceeds will help me build a guest cabin for others fighting HOA bullies, because Karen wasn't the only one. HOA tyrants are everywhere, and now there's a roadmap to fight them. So here's where you come in. Drop a comment with your own HOA nightmare. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more stories of ordinary people standing up to corruption. Because trust me, you're not alone. And don't miss next week's story. The city councilman who tried to shut down a veterans' food truck. Until some of his Pentagon buddies paid a visit, welcome to HOA Stories, where the Karens finally meet their match.